All right, so where we're starting at is where are the Lenape from? Now, the word Lenape, it means original people, and they lived in what we know as Lenapehoking, which means land of the original people. Now, to be honest, a lot of people use Lenapehoking like it's a ancestral word back from a very, very, very long time, and it did not. The term was coined only back in the 1960s and 70s by a educator, a Delaware, Oklahoma, Delaware indigenous woman by the name of Nora Thompson Dean, because she was tasked with the idea of how do we describe where Lenape came from and where are the Lenape now? So she coined the term Lenape Hopikin, which loosely for her, when she translated it, meant land of the original people. So that's where everybody came from originally. Now, Lenape Hokin has many rivers, streams, and lakes, and it was densely forested and had a wide variety of wild plants and animals. There was also open spaces, but for our focus, which is a lot of Delaware Lenape, you're going to see a lot of waterways and a lot of forested areas. Okay. So with the Lenape, you're not just looking at the idea of where
This is
they.
so good right now.
All right. So if everyone wants to like put themselves on silent, that would be awesome. Just in case you needed to talk to somebody in the background. But anyway, how do we know about Lenape people? We know through archaeology, which is learning about human history by the excavation and study of artifacts found in layers in the soil and ground. So when we show this to kids, what we're showing them is a lot of the older stuff. If it's
Wilson.
stuff that is not churned up through many different um, years through human interaction, then the layers pretty much stay consistent. So with those layers that are consistent, the oldest stuff is going to be at the bottom, and then the newest stuff is at the top. So if there's an area that what we call is contaminated, that would be like modern mixed with um, Native American stuff that is super old. So that means we can't use that data because it's been mixed up altogether with modern stuff. So we do it by the scientific process, and that scientific process is a lot of grids. If you notice that there is an Egyptologist there, it was the cleanest picture that I could find, so you could see what an archaeologist does, which is open grid patterns. And the idea is every layer has to be taken down in a very methodical way. So you'll take a layer down, everything that's found, a picture is taken, and plots on a paper will be checked off saying, yeah, this is what this thing is, and this is where it was found in that square. So it's some math, it's a lot of research, and it's a lot of getting dirty. So that's what archaeology typically does. And that's yet a different view. This was from Virginia at a dig site, and it just shows you another view as to how archaeology is done. It's not just let's dig a hole. It's literally why do we want to dig here? What do you think we're going to find when we dig here? And then let's map it out. So we also know about the Lenape people by looking at things like oral traditions. You have the knowledge of culture and art and ideas. They are passed on from one generation to another. Oral traditions is not the end all be all. That's not what you want to do. You don't want to focus just on oral traditions because then you kind of miss a lot of the nuances. And in those nuances, you are getting things such as the science mixed in. But with oral traditions, oral means by mouth and through words. So this is an example of how we break down oral traditions. We explain how the words go with this is what oral means. And then we ask the kids a question. What do you think, or what are some ways can you think of passing information through words? And that gives the kids to gives the kids a chance. There we go, to think about different ways on using words, not just talking to each other, but also written or graffiti on walls somewhere as art. So things like that. So we're also focusing on things like songs. So Lenape had a very rich history of songs and dance. They're also telling lots of stories. So every story had a moral kind of meaning to it. So, for example, even the way that the Lenapes on how they got their tribes land and how they got their clans, because with clans, how I explain it to kids is that clans are like our last names. It's who you come from. And for the Lenape, they are a matrilineal people, which means everything that they know comes from their mother's side of the family. So the story that is told by Lenape people on how they got their clan names, because it didn't come from out of nowhere, they're getting their clan names from something that happened in their environment. So most of the stories that the Lenape have are typically based on nature, how nature interacted with each other, and then when people came to be, how did people react to that nature? So the story that I know that deals with the Turtle Clan is the people were in danger, and at one point they saw some turtles in the water, and the turtle said, "If you want to get out of danger, climb on my back, and I'll take you across the river to be in the safe place." And the people were a little scared. And the turtle said, "Look, there are many of us. We can get you across the river. You will be safe." And so the people finally agreed, okay, fine, we'll get on these turtles and hopefully we won't drown in the water because we don't know how to swim yet. So the turtles got everybody over to the other side, and then those people were safe. So when they were safe, they were trying to think of a way to honor the turtles. So the people who were saved by turtles, they turned to the turtles and said, by your help, we will always be known as turtle people because you saved us. So therefore, we will honor you in that way of remembering you. So turtles are a big theme for Lenape people, but nature in general is a really big theme for indigenous people. Not just the Lenape, but all indigenous people. And we're also looking at how are indigenous people using humor. Uh, Indigenous people, all people technically, we have a lot of humor in us. So for us to be able to tell a joke with each other, it kind of helps build the relationships, and it helps build the morality of your groups that you tend to live around. So when dealing again with the Lenape in a way that uh, where community is concerned, Lenape communities could be as big as large villages with hundreds of people living in them, or as small as a group of 10 to 50 people. For a community to succeed, everyone needs to take a part and do a job. Now, for men, they're clearing the land. They are the ones that are building the buildings, but they are getting help from the other people in their families. They are making canoes, they're hunting, they're fishing, they're protecting the community. And that is just an example of what a canoe that the Lenape would have been using would have been looking like during the time of making the canoe. So dugout canoes is the choice of canoes that they're using. Now, the reason why they're called dugout canoes is because you would take the tree, you would put mud around it from about your waist high to about your knees, really thick mud all the way around the tree. And then right below that, you would set a fire. The tree would fall. You would get the bark off of it because you don't need it, and then you would set fire to the log, however long you want the canoe to be. And you use the mud technique of constantly adding mud where you don't want the canoe to burn, and then you expose the rest where you do want the canoe to burn. But you don't let it burn all the way through. You time that burn, you take your time, and once it's burned to the point where you want it, you put the fire out, you take a tool and you dig out the charcoal parts. That's why it's called a dugout canoe. You're digging out all of that burnt stuff, and then you start the process again. So canoe making was a team effort. It wasn't just one guy. It was normally several guys trying to get canoes done. Now they're also doing what's called flint knapping, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I just wanted you to see an image of a spearhead. No, no, this is an arrowhead. Spearheads look a little bit different, but this is an arrowhead and it is made out of the jasper here at Iron Hill. So just to give you a little information in regards to the jasper at Iron Hill, this area was used for thousands of years for Lenape people and Susquehannock people to come and make their tools. So Jasper plays a lot in the type of tool making that is found all over the state of Delaware, into Pennsylvania, and a little bit into Maryland, as well as into New Jersey. Now, the last image on this is a version what's called night fishing. You'll see how the men are in their canoes. You'll also see torches because certain types of food are awake during the day and other types of food are awake at night. So if you wanted to get things like eels, night fishing is one of those things where it can happen. So it wasn't done often, but when it was done in a way that was this is like an artistic way of showing how it can be done. You can also do it on shore. You don't need to be in a canoe, but this is just an idea of how Lenape people are utilizing both the nighttime and the daytime to gather the food sources that they need. Now, women, they're planting and harvesting and gathering crops. If you notice, there's an asterisk. Now, if you go to the bottom of the screen in the asterisk, it says the Lenape and Delaware did not grow food before contact. And we know this not just with knowing how the landscape and the topography of Delaware was during that time, but we also look at it through archaeology. So there is different branches of archaeology where we can look at soil samples in archaeological dig sites. So one of the things that we're looking at is when we like uncover an area where a Lenape family would be living. We take soil samples from around their cooking areas as well as inside of their storage areas of those soils. So when we test them, it's called the floral and faunal analysis. So when we're looking at that analysis, we are only finding things like nuts and berries and acorns and deer and bear and small game like rabbits and squirrels. We are not finding the Three Sisters crops. We're finding that in like Pennsylvania. We're finding that in New Jersey. We're finding that in Lenape communities in New York, but we are not finding that in communities in Delaware. And Delaware's a little bit different too. So Lenape and Delaware, they're not living in big villages. They're living in small family units. So they're not unified together as like a village. They're just their own little family that meet up with other little families occasionally if things get a little lean or if they want to have a time to celebrate their changings of the year. Like for Lenape people, October is known as the New Year. So it's a 13-day ceremony that this year starts next Wednesday and it runs for 13 days. So families will gather together to celebrate those marks of time, but they're not in a they're not in a village setting. But anyway, back to women's work. They make pottery out of clay. During Woodland 2 period, Woodland 1 period, what they're actually doing is making their stuff out of stone, like soapstone. Now, soapstone in this area we're getting it from Aston, Pennsylvania. So that's where they're seeing the genetic markers of those rocks. They're linking them back to Aston. So if in this area, like North Wilmington, because I don't know if you guys where all of you are, but North Wilmington, Newcastle County area, a lot of the soapstone we're finding from like places like Aston, Pennsylvania, Exton, Pennsylvania, places like that. So that means that the Lenape people, if they're not walking to the area that we now know as Aston, and places like that, that means they're doing with trading goods. They'll trade one good for a different good so they can have the rocks that they need to make those tools that they need. Now, the women are also preparing animal hides for clothing and shelter. Uh, the also preparing food and gathering plants for food and medicines. Now, with food and medicines, medicines are legitimately what that indicates. The women are the ones who are the first line of defense if someone gets sick. They're the ones that know the plants that heal and also the plants that harm. You only at this point, if you are sick and the plants that your mom gives you helps you feel better, you don't need to see a medicine person. The only time that you would ever go to a medicine person is if there is a more intense sickness that your mom's medicine is not working for. And in this case, if you notice, I said medicine person, I did not say shaman. Shaman is like a mis you don't use that phrase for indigenous people of America. Shaman is typically a term used for Asian cultures where they have their medicine people. That's where the term shaman came from. It ended up coming over here to try to explain medicine people of the New World, America, not the New World as in like it's brand new, but you know what I mean. But it's medicine people, and each tribe had their own name for their medicine people. But we're just generic. We're just using the generic term at this point. Now, for the women, this is a sherd of pottery that they would have made. It would have been a lot bigger bowl, but each family had a unique type of uh, pattern that they would put into their bowls. So they would know, oh, this is my pot, not like the family across the way. It's not her pot because my family designs have these stripes on it where her family designs have X's in it instead. So it was a way to figure out whose was whose through family passed down tradition of uh, patterns in your bowls. And that's just an animal skin, and then that is food that you could cook in that clay pot. Now, children, they learned from the adults. The boys, for example, boys carried hunting gear and the girls helped with food preparation. They're also playing games. You're not a kid if you don't play games. So, games back then were made for honing skills and for dexterity and for motor skills. And the little game that you see right here is a type of hoop and target game where you have darts that have feathers attached and you throw it towards that hoop. And that hoop can either be laying on the ground or you can throw it up in the air. And wherever your dart goes through, the points are either more or less. So the smaller spaces, you get more points. The bigger holes, you get less points because they're easier to hit those targets. So continuing with Lenape community. Okay. These jobs weren't only done by men or women. Once the men got their stuff done, they would help the women of their family. So in this image, you'll see a guy taking care of his kids, making sure that they get fed. You see a guy in the background drying some food. He's hanging it up above a fire, so the smoke of the fire helps uh, preserve that food. But women also hunted. So in this image, you're seeing that that usual separation of work skill. skills being used as usual. So the women are doing their stuff, the men are doing their stuff, but it's not unheard of for women to check the traps, or if there's a deer by their family's homes, that they can get those animals by hunting those animals very quickly. And the same thing with men. If the women are too busy, they'll jump in when their work is done and get stuff done. So the community was based on working together to help each other out. That's the end result. How can we survive? We do that by working together. Right, and this is just like a blanket question we normally ask kids. What kind of things that you would be working on in regards to your everyday life? So what we're looking at now is the type of buildings that the Lenape are going to be living in. The Lenape in Delaware are living in wigwams. Okay. Now, they were built by digging saplings into the ground and bending the ends together in a dome shape and tied together. So that's step one. That's your step two. That's where you're starting to bend that frame into place. That's where you have a full frame. Once the walls are built, they covered them with weaved reeds, bark, and animal hides. Animal hides, for the most part, you're keeping it at the top, only because it helps regulate the smoke in the smoke hole. Uh, During other times of the year, during the winter time, it's a more like stable thing, like a flap of bark that you can move up and down. But with the houses, the animal skins are going to absolutely be used in the doorways. During the colder spring mornings, during the winter, and during the autumn where the night starts to get cold, you're hanging up your animal skins, and that's to keep that draft out. Otherwise, during the summertime, it's way too hot to put a door up. So you're just keeping the door open. Now, the last thing that they're going to be doing, if you look at that just as a quick image as to how the houses are going to be covered, just to give you an idea, the last stage is to put mud on the interior of the walls. And that mud is to help protect the homes from burning down. Because if you've got a fire going on the inside of your wigwam when it's the nighttime, uh, then you need to see, right? You don't want your house to burn down. So that mud was very important to cake on the inside of those walls. Now, it's so much easier to just make more mud when the mud finally just dries up completely and falls off the walls. It's so much better to do it that way than to constantly build new houses. Now, we do know through archaeology, once again, archaeology is we notice in archaeology spots where we know where families lived, they came there over and over and over again over the generations. And we know this because we see post holes. So in that very first image where you have the sticks sticking straight up and they're not bent yet, if you look, there's holes there where other trees will start to go in. Now, in archaeology, when that wood rots, the soil becomes a darker color, and that is called a post hole. So we know that that is the exterior of a building. So with that exterior of a building, what we're finding is many different house post holes all kind of lapping over each other. So we know it's not one weird looking wigwam. We know it's several different wigwams over generations of time that the families are going to the exact same spots of where they were always going to and rebuilding wigwams once they needed to build a new wigwam. So it's family units always going back to certain ancestral spots over and over and over again. It's really exciting when you find like overlapping post holes like that. Now, with buildings in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey and in New York, Lenape communities that were larger, they built long houses. That means your family could live with other families in a really big home. And there would be a series of fires that would go down the center of the longhouse, so you could have a family on either side, uh, or the same family on both sides. So that was really great if your family and your extended family were really big. Now, in stuff like villages and stuff like larger communities, they also had a smaller building than a longhouse called a big house. And that was for important meetings, and ceremony could be done. When a bachelor hadn't been married yet, he would live in and around the big house, because he didn't have a space left for his within his mother's family anymore, because he's supposed to be off and married at that point. So, in other words, it's kind of like the YMCA, if you want to think about it like that. If we wanted to use an example of today's world, yeah. All right, so the Lenape would move their communities to a new place every 10 years to find new resources. We know this for Delaware. We don't know this as much as for Pennsylvania or New Jersey or New York. They weren't as semi-nomadic as the Delaware Lenape. The Delaware Lenape, because they weren't farming, they were utilizing their environment to an extreme amount. So if they wanted to have resources uh, every season that they needed, every so often they would have to change locations. So where they were could build up again in that 10 to 20-year time. So when they moved back to that area, the resources would be grown up again, so then they could start using those resources again. So it was like a back and forth teeter totter thing. So Delaware Lenape are definitely semi-nomadic hunters and gatherers, and well, and also fishing, but for the most part, it's semi-nomadic is the phrase that we use a lot here in the state of Delaware. Now, with gathering and harvesting, oh, there is a delay on this. Okay, there we go. The Lenape took full advantage of the abundant resources of Lenapehoking. In the north, large communities farmed crops and gathered other plant materials. The Lenape never farmed in Delaware because the populations of people were small, and gathering naturally growing plants gave them all they needed. So not only was that small, but what was Delaware known for? Marshes and trees. So we didn't have the manpower to open up wide expanses of land, but we also didn't have the need to do that, because there was enough wild plants here that we could survive without doing that kind of stuff. Now, people do tend to teach kids a lot about what the three sisters are, which is the corn, squash, and beans. And corn, squash, and beans are great. They work in harmony. It's a great staple crop to have. There's a long story about the reason why we plant them, the way that we plant them, and but you also have to remember in context, where is that actually being used? And not all indigenous people were farmers. They just weren't. At some point or another, due to contact with Europeans, they end up becoming farmers a lot more. But for the most part, a lot of indigenous people were not farming. But in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey and in New York, where Lenape are present, they're intermingling in with the Susquehannocks down here, the intermingling with Susquehannocks in parts of Pennsylvania. They're intermingling with the Haudenosaunee, which is the Iroquois Confederacy up in New York. So they're having cultural exchanges with different groups depending upon what part of where you are in Lenapehoking. Okay. So with those corn, squash, and beans, where they are grown, the corn is always the first thing to go in. And that corn, once it starts to grow to a certain height, then the squash and the beans go in there. Now, the Lenape are not just growing one kind of corn or one kind of beans or one kind of squash. They're actually growing multiple kinds. So we know from oral history and from a little bit of archaeology, there was at least 6 different kinds of corn at least 23 different kinds of beans, and at least about 8 or 9 different types of squash. So if you guys ever wanted to know more of that information, I have my email at the end that you can always email me and ask me, hey, what other kinds of beans or corns and squash did they use? And I'll be happy to share that with you. But for time, oh yeah, for time, we got to keep trucking. So continuing with gathering and harvesting. Ooh, this delay, I swear. They gathered many different types of mushrooms, nuts, and berries. They also gathered plants with other uses like moss. Now, that says diapers, but it's not in the standard way that you know. What technically is used in this case is if the mom is too busy working and her kid just wants to be picked up. They will have, it's kind of like a leather backpack almost. It's more like a leather sling where you don't want the baby to poo and the pee on you, right? So you put moss and cattail fluff in the bottom of that. So the baby ends up messing on that stuff instead of messing in the bag to have it mess on you. So there's that. But moss is also really good to apply paint and also for medicinal uses like bandages. They're also gathering things like pokeberries. They're poisonous to eat, but their red berries are fantastic for dyeing. And in this case, we're just showing how yarn can be different colors. But in reality, what we're looking at is the possibilities of what animal skin colors can be as well. Because when you tan an animal hide, it's a very pale color. But what if you don't want your outfit to be very pale tan all the time? Well, you can use plant dyes for that. And in this case, it's the pokeberries. And you get anywhere from like a nice orangey golden color to a nice reddish orange color. They're also collecting things like dog bane stem, and that's very fibrous, and you can use it. That's just an image of someone breaking it apart so you can see the fiber. It can be used for tying your wigwams together, but also for making rope and nets. Because when dog bane is rolled together, it's a very strong kind of rope. It's a natural rope, obviously, but it's a strong kind of natural rope that you can get in this area. And that just to get that's an image just to give you a little bit more view as to how fibrous dog bane can get. It used to be very numerous around here, but it's not as numerous as it once was. And the last one is cattails. In the spring, they are young and you can eat them. It tastes, I have only had them cooked. I haven't had them raw, so I can't speak to that. I can't imagine a marshy plant that I would want to put in my mouth from the ground. But to me, when they're cooked, they taste like very mild asparagus almost. You don't want to get anything beyond, I want to say about a foot tall. After that, they don't taste great. So if it's under a foot and they're just starting to come up, that's fine. Otherwise, just let them grow. And they're really good for, again, for diapers, but they're also really good as fire starters. They're fantastic for fire starters. So that right there is just an image to show you how much cattail fluffs will expand once you break into them. And that's all seeds right there. So when I talk to this to little kids, I say it's kind of like a dandelion. You got all those wishes. Well, look at all those wishes. That's a lot of wishes. So, but that's all the seed pods that will eventually blow away to make more cattails. But again, it's flammable and it's absorbent depending upon how you want to use it. I know a lot of families would, when it's in that stage, what they're doing is setting fire to it and then it's repelling mosquitoes because mosquitoes don't like the smell, or it's not they don't like the smell, it's the smoke in it that kind of forces them to leave the area. Now, that's just a question that we ask the students, which are what are some things around you that come from plants? And this is an interesting question that we get a lot of different answers for. Now, with hunting and trapping, the Lenape ate and used parts of many different kinds of animals. They're hunting deer and bear. Okay. Large animals are hunted. Now, they're using atlatls and spears. They're not coming up with bows and arrows until right before contact period. And right before contact period, they're coming up with those bows and arrows. And that technology is coming to them through places like the Ohio River Valley at that point. So for here, the technology for thousands and thousands of years is atlatls and spears. Uh, like I said, bows and arrows didn't come until right before the Europeans pop up. So that is a type of atlatl that we have here at the museum. Actually, the handle is a little bit different. But what we do with small school groups is that we take them out and have them throw the darts so they can see how hard it is to use an atlatl spear. But if it's like a big school group, that's a little bit difficult. We just describe it at that point. Now, this is getting back into what flint knapping is. I'll just give you a moment to read that on your own as I keep talking. And this is just to show you right next door, arrowhead versus a spearhead. Arrowheads are actually going to be smaller than spearheads, but because my collections manager of the time, she was doing really nice images on our collections to put them in our electronic database. She took the images where they were around about the same size. So you've got those arrowheads versus spearheads. If you notice, the spearheads have notchings in the back, the arrowheads are not going to have those notchings. Yeah. And they're, like I said, they're about one third to one half the size of a spearhead. Now, if we continue on with trapping and hunting, ligaments were dried and softened to make sinew that could be used as thread. Uh, the the thing on the left is when it's dried. This, the string on the right is after it's processed, and you process that by using a rock and water or just by chewing on it. Men are going to use it wet to put it on their spears. And then when it dries, it shrinks. So it's really hard to get the rocks off of the ends of the spears. Women are going to process it and then let it dry, but they're going to constantly move it as it's drying so they can use it to make clothing. Okay. So you can't, it makes a lot more sense to take a couple of deer than to take like 20 raccoons to make a coat. So this is like 2.5 deer skins to make this jacket. This jacket is a newer jacket. It's still a Lenape jacket. It's actually a Delaware tribe of Indians jacket from Oklahoma. And that just to give you an idea from the early 1800s as to what their clothing started to look like during that time. And deer bones and antlers were also made for different tools. So tools like this, the tool at the top, that is going to be a scraper where they're scraping all the brain matter off as they're tanning their animal skins. The thing next to that is a counter. If you notice, it's got notches on that. That right below that, this thing here is a sewing needle, and this is an awl. And then down here, these are hairpins. So it's just a variety of things that you can do with deer bones. So all of this is bones, and then this is also a bone, which is the leg of a deer, and that's sinew right in there to make that tool. Now, hunting and trapping, they're trapping the small stuff, raccoons, rabbits, foxes, and that's just a variety of different traps and fish. They're also trapping fish. So those are the different types of traps that they're using to get the smaller animals. So they don't have to be hunting every day, all day. They also have times where they can just sit back and wait. And those traps can do the job for them. Now, with fishing, they're using it, they're making their nets and they're putting rocks at the end to weigh down those nets. They're also using fish wares. You'll see that fish wares is down here in the middle. That's a fish ware right there. The fish goes in, they can't figure out how to get back out. And then someone walks over to the fish ware, just spears the fish. Um, I like this image, but I also do not like this image because of here's the use of a fishware, but then this is kind of not historically totally accurate. Nets like this would be a little bit too much of a hassle to handle. So fishwares were a lot more important to use than massive nets. The nets are just way too big.
Oh, are you on camera?
They're also collecting things like clams, oysters, and scallops.
I put
They're
shit in
eating
this stuff.
lobsters,
Yell at me.
crabs.
Put way too much shit in.
Why am I gonna yell at
I
you?
don't know. I put. There's a math app in the
All right,
Bridges.
Mrs. Wilson, could you pause for a moment, please? Your sound. You can continue talking afterwards.
Sorry.
It's okay. It happens. I do it all the time too. All right, so there you go. But anyway, so back then, lobsters and clams were known as like poor people food or savage food, quote unquote. Just phrasing how the colonial people would term indigenous people, because it was stuff that you could find on the shores. Now we know it's like, whew, really expensive foods that you can get, right? But back then it was a lot cheaper, and people didn't want to eat it because it looked kind of funky. Now, it's another question that we ask kids periodically is where do we get our food from? How is it the same than Lenape people are getting it? And there's a lot of differences, and the kids come up with really interesting answers on that. All right, so, come on, my PowerPoint is being. There we go. Preparing and storing food. Lenape believed that no one should go hungry. If they had visitors, they shared. So that's a woman pounding up corn. Behind her is a drying rack, and as well as a pot that would have been over a fire. In some cases, instead of it over a fire, there could be a what's called pouch cooking, where they took the stomach of a deer and they emptied it and tanned it, and then they heated up rocks and put it into the pouch. So it's kind of like a really kind of gross crock pot if you think about it. So food was also stored. You would, well, it was cooked over fires. It was uh, on racks, in like pouches, like I said, wrapped in leaves, buried in ashes, or stuck on sticks, and then also like sat over the ashes. Where am I going? Come on, where's my PowerPoint? There we go. Pits lined with woven mats are dug deep into the ground during harvest time. And at the end of the summer, if you are farmers, you're cutting up your corn and your squash and your beans. You're cutting them up, or you're hanging them, braiding them together, and drying them out. So in the winter, you can have that ground stuff um, from your pits. You can have it, you can grind it up, and then make basically it's reconstituted food, right? You take the dried stuff, you add water to it, it makes it more palpable. Yeah. Now, history is recorded by Lenape using quahog and whelk shells. It's not written records. There is no written records until colonial period. So you have what's called wampum. Now, wampum is record keeping and also for jewelry. It's not money until the French people show up. They kind of messed it up for a lot of people. So French people come in and they're like, wow, they kind of use this like money. No, they're not using, Lenape people are not using it like money. They're using it for record keeping, and to things like declaring war or adoptions or a death or a birth. So it's record keeping. Uh, these belts are handed down from one generation to another. And these belts, these records, talk about treaties between tribes. They talk about families marrying into each other. So those are the records. They're talking about boundary markers and everything else in these records. So a story goes with the belts, and you have to remember the story to remember the pattern of the belt. Okay. And that story talks about those historical things that the Lenape are trying to remember. For example, treaties between different tribes, the adoptions and the deaths, and so on. Now, this is just a quick look as to how wampum belts were used when colonial period popped in. This is a belt that's on display at the Philadelphia History Museum. It was said that William Penn was given this belt by the Lenape, and it was a treaty that was signed in 1682 between William Penn and the Lenape at Saxe-Maxim Park, which is still a park today that the Lenape people and other native nations still do programs at. Even in present day, I was just there last month. They even had an event there this past weekend for for National Indigenous Peoples Day. They still had an event there, and the wampum belt at the bottom, excuse me, it is the agreement that the Lenape had. So the taller figure is supposed to be William Penn. The shorter figure is supposed to be a Lenape person. But I've also heard it other ways, like the native person's on the left and William Penn's on the right. So whoever is describing what that belt means, that's who they think is who, either William Penn or a native guy. The diagonal lines represents the major rivers through Philadelphia. Right. Now, art, every culture around the world has some form of art. The Lenape made functional art. So you're wearing it or using it, as well as looking at it to enjoy it. So this is just some of the pre-contact stuff as well as post-contact stuff. Now, I do want to say the bottom left-hand corner, the mask that is half red, half black, that is Mising, and Mising is the protector of the forest. And that is used a lot of the times around Lenape New Year, like I said, is this month. So what they're doing is they're using this mask to embody the spirit of the uh, the the Mising, and it's not just a way to protect the woods and have that person represent the protector of the woods, but it also kind of scares kids into not acting like foolish little kids like they tend to do sometimes. All right. So the last slide that I have, second to last slide that I have, is populations of Lenape people today are found in many parts of the US and even in Canada. What you have is a lot of Lenape people, if they're not in their homelands, they're not federally recognized. Some of them are state recognized, like the Cheswold Lenape right outside of Dover. They're recognized in the state of Delaware. You have the Nanticoke Lenape in southern Jersey. You also have the Eastern Delaware Nation, or EDN in Pennsylvania. They're not state recognized, they're just recognized in their communities. But then you have the Lenape in Wisconsin and in Canada and the Delaware in Oklahoma. So that is just, it doesn't work. I don't know why it doesn't work, but this is a video from Nanticoke Lenape about their powwow that they had back in 2017, 16, 17, right in there. And they're interviewing modern day indigenous people. So you get a chance to see who they are and what they do in modern world. But anyway, this is the last slide. Thank goodness I'm right on time. And this is a just a way to contact me in case you have any more questions. So I know that I'm like slipping into other people's time, but if anyone does have any questions, I gladly take that now. Any questions? Okay. Very welcome, guys. You guys are from everywhere. That's awesome. All right. right, so if you guys don't have any questions, like I said, my contact information is right at the bottom of that slide. So if you ever need anything from me, I'm just an email or a phone call away. I'm more than happy to help you out with any questions you have regarding Indigenous people. The question is, are you sharing PowerPoint with the participants? I can. I can do that. So I just need to ask my IT person because once again, I give the knowledge. I don't do the computer. I will get them to help me, and then I can share that with Holly, and then Holly can email anyone who was in the presentation today. She can email that PowerPoint out to everybody. You're very welcome. Now I am giving a talk in the afternoon. It's about a lot more information. It's some of it's going to be a little more eye-opening than what I have today. It's a little bit more, I want to say a little bit darker. Um, but that's only because it's for older audiences, um, trying to help out, trying to figure out, I should say, um, how European contact kind of changed things around a lot. So that's going to be, I think that's at 1:30, I think it's at 1:30. All right, so I think there's very few of us now. There's only seven, six. There we go. Somebody else. So I'm gonna close this off. Sue, if you're still around within earshot, you can stop now. Because we're now done. And I won't need to do my thing until like 1:30. I'm gonna text her real quick because there's no reason for me to still be open. Okay, I'm gonna stop share now. Yay! All right, now I just got to figure out how to stop recording. Sue, wake up, Sue.